Jonathan Cahn. Welcome to my YouTube channel. When you look at what's happening in the world, it's easy to wonder what's going on, and are things out of control? Is this what the Bible foretold? Is the end near? What do I need to know about the future? Where's it all going? How can I be prepared? What is God's prophetic word for the hour and for me? On this channel, you're going to find prophetic updates, the mysteries of God, daily words for life, biblical revelation, prophetic teachings, and much more. I pray it's going to be a great blessing to you in the days ahead. So be sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time there's a new video that's posted. Leave a comment as to how God is blessing you. And don't forget to share these videos with friends who need to hear them. Thanks again, and God bless you. Shalom.
Ladies and gentlemen, we stand at a crossroads in history, a moment where the winds shift and the balance of nations sways before our very eyes. A time when the alliances that once seemed immovable begin to tremble. The question echoes through the chambers of power, the halls of government, the hearts of the watchful. Why is America siding with Iran over Israel in 2025? Not long ago, such a question would have been unthinkable. For decades, the bond between America and Israel was declared unbreakable. A friendship forged in shared values, mutual interests, and many would say divine destiny. But now we see a change, a turn, a pivot. Agreements are signed in silence, meetings held behind closed doors. Sanctions are lifted, words are softened, and the once cold hand of Iran is being shaken, while the warm hand of Israel grows colder in the grip of politics. But this is more than politics. It is a shift in spirit. We must ask ourselves, how did we arrive here? Why would the land that once stood as a defender of liberty and justice now offer favor to a regime that chants death to its very name? Why would the same nation that declared Jerusalem its ally now question that allegiance, now grow silent when Israel is isolated? It is not simply about strategy. It is not just diplomacy. It is something deeper, something spiritual. When a nation turns from its moral compass, its alliances follow. When it exalts pride over truth, it loses discernment. When it honors convenience over covenant, it forgets who it is. And when it seeks peace without righteousness, it finds neither. You see, Iran is not just a nation. It is a symbol of defiance, of ancient empires that rose against the people of God. And Israel is not merely a state. It is a sign of covenant, of prophecy, of the hand of God moving through history. And so when America turns its face from Israel and turns instead toward Iran, it is not just a political realignment, it is a prophetic moment. This is not about one administration. This is not about one president. This is about the soul of a nation that once declared, "In God we trust," now trusting in deals, treaties, and shifting sands. A nation that once honored truth, now trading it for global applause. But history has spoken. Every empire that has turned against Israel has seen decline. Every ruler that has stood in defiance of God's purposes has seen their time come to an end. And the word remains, "I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you." So the question is not just, why is America siding with Iran? The greater question is, what spirit is guiding her? And if the foundations are being shaken, what can the righteous do? The answer is this: return. Return to truth. Return to covenant. Return to the God who blessed this nation, not because of its strength, but because it honored what was right. Let us not be swayed by headlines or trends. Let us not be fooled by temporary peace. Let us remember who we are and what we are called to stand for. The hour is late, the warning is clear, and the choice is ours. America's shift in alliance from Israel toward Iran in 2025 represents a significant and deeply unsettling change in international relations, one that would have been nearly unthinkable just a decade ago. For years, Israel has stood as America's most reliable ally in the Middle East, a democratic partner, a beacon of stability in a region often riddled with chaos. The two nations shared intelligence, coordinated military strategies, and publicly reaffirmed their commitment to mutual survival. Israel looked to America for both moral and material support, and America, in return, found in Israel a reflection of its own foundational values: liberty, faith, and resilience in the face of hostility. Yet now the tables are turning. The headlines don't shout it, but the whispers are undeniable. Deals are being made in silence. Sanctions that once pressured Iran into compliance are being lifted or quietly ignored. American envoys, once frequent in Jerusalem, are now seen more often shaking hands in Tehran. There's a growing tone of ambiguity when U.S. officials speak of Israel, a shift from unwavering support to cautious distance, from alignment to mere diplomacy. This is more than a change in policy. It is a shift in posture, in heart, in principle. The realignment becomes even more alarming when one considers the nature of the regime that America is now engaging with more openly. Iran is not just a regional power with differing interests. It is a nation led by a regime that openly funds terror, chants "Death to America" in its public squares, and calls for the eradication of Israel as a state. This is not rumor or speculation. These are words spoken openly by Iranian leaders and echoed through their media. Iran backs groups that fire rockets into Israeli neighborhoods and that plant hatred across generations. And yet, it is toward this regime that America is increasingly extending its hand. Such a shift sends a loud signal to the world, even if it is done in silence. It tells Israel that its security concerns are no longer front and center. It tells Iran that hostility can be rewarded if it's dressed in the right language or timed with the right geopolitical tension. It tells the world that America's commitments are no longer based on moral clarity, but on calculated interests and shifting sands. What makes this even more unsettling is the apparent normalization of it all. Commentators speak of strategic recalibration. Officials talk about balance of power. But underneath the diplomatic language lies a reality that speaks of abandonment. For a small nation like Israel, surrounded by enemies, vulnerable to every shift in regional power, the withdrawal of unwavering support from its most powerful ally is not a minor adjustment. It is a potential existential threat. Moreover, this shift is not taking place in a vacuum. It is occurring at a time when Israel faces rising hostility from international institutions, increasing isolation in global forums, and escalating attacks from terror networks emboldened by perceived Western hesitation. At such a time, America's pivot away from its traditional ally and toward one of its historical enemies is not only questionable, it is dangerous. This is not merely a strategic misstep. It is a betrayal of principle. It reveals a deeper unraveling of the values that once guided America's foreign policy: loyalty to allies, resistance to tyranny, and support for democratic partners. If those values are no longer guiding decisions, what is? And if friendship with a regime like Iran becomes politically viable, even preferable, what does that say about the state of American leadership? In every great story of decline, there is a moment when alliances shift, when trusted friendships are traded for unstable appeasement, when nations begin to forget who they once were. For America, this moment may well be unfolding now, and history will not be silent about it. The shifting of America's stance from Israel toward Iran is not simply a matter of diplomacy or geopolitical strategy. It is a reflection of something far deeper, far more consequential. Beneath the surface of international relations lies a spiritual reality, one that guides the rise and fall of nations, whether they recognize it or not. This moment in history is not merely about treaties and tensions, but about the soul of a nation and the spiritual forces that shape its direction. Every nation has a spiritual identity, a moral foundation upon which it was built. America, from its founding, declared its dependence on a higher authority. Its earliest documents acknowledged the Creator, and its leaders once openly prayed for wisdom and divine favor. This spiritual foundation informed its actions on the world stage, including its support for Israel, which was never merely a strategic alliance, but one rooted in shared spiritual heritage. America saw in Israel not just a partner in democracy, but a nation chosen by God, a land whose destiny was written in the pages of Scripture. But as time has passed, that foundation has eroded. What we see today in America's foreign policy is a mirror of what has already taken place within its own borders. The turning away from Israel is not the cause. It is the symptom. It is the outward expression of an inward drift, a moral and spiritual departure from the values that once anchored the nation. When a nation begins to forget God, it forgets what is right. When it abandons truth, it loses discernment. And when it seeks to appease evil in the name of peace, it invites destruction instead. This spiritual shift is subtle but pervasive. It is seen in the way evil is redefined and good is dismissed. It is present when leaders praise diplomacy while ignoring injustice. It is alive when a regime like Iran, known for persecution, violence, and repression, is welcomed to the table of respectability while Israel is criticized for defending its existence. Such decisions are not made in a vacuum. They are influenced by a spirit, a worldview, a set of values that no longer aligns with righteousness or biblical truth. In the Scriptures, we are told that nations are accountable for how they treat Israel, not only politically, but spiritually. The relationship with Israel is not just about land or treaties. It is about covenant. God declared, "I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you." This was not merely a poetic line. It is a spiritual law, a principle of divine justice that has echoed throughout history. Every empire that stood against Israel eventually fell. Babylon, Rome, Nazi Germany, all rose in power and all fell in judgment. And now, America is approaching that same dangerous line, not through open hostility, but through neglect, compromise, and a spiritual dullness that no longer recognizes the difference between light and darkness. To side with Iran over Israel is not merely a diplomatic blunder. It is a spiritual offense. It is to favor a regime that embodies hatred over a nation that has carried a promise. It is to join hands with those who seek destruction while turning a cold shoulder to those who seek peace. And it is a sign, a prophetic marker, that the spiritual condition of the nation has changed. When spiritual discernment is lost, alliances become confused. Decisions are no longer guided by truth, but by political survival, economic gain, or ideological convenience. But spiritual blindness is dangerous, for it opens the door to deception. What appears to be strategy becomes surrender. What seems like peace becomes compromise. And what is labeled progress is, in fact, decline. America's increasing favor toward Iran and its cooling stance toward Israel is more than just a realignment of foreign policy. It is the direct result of a nation losing its moral compass. A compass guides direction. It shows true north, especially when storms arise or the way ahead is uncertain. But when that compass is broken or ignored, a nation begins to drift, and it may not even realize how far it has gone until the shore has disappeared from view. That is precisely what is happening now. There was a time when America's moral clarity was unmistakable. It stood with its allies not only because it was politically wise, but because it was morally right. It called out evil by name and did not shrink from defending what was just. But that clarity has grown dim. Lines have been blurred. Convictions have been replaced by calculations. What used to be decisions guided by principles are now moves driven by optics, polls, and public opinion. The result is confusion, not just among leaders, but among the people. When America begins to favor Iran, a regime with a long record of sponsoring terrorism, suppressing its own people, and threatening to annihilate another nation, it signals not strength, but moral erosion. It shows that decisions are no longer being made through the lens of good and evil, but through convenience, appeasement, and fear of global backlash. Iran does not hide its intentions. Its leaders have repeatedly and openly declared their hatred for both Israel and the United States. Yet, America now engages with them under the pretense of diplomacy, treating their government as legitimate partners rather than holding them accountable for decades of aggression. This loss of moral compass affects more than just foreign policy. It influences everything. It shifts the culture, the media, the education system. A generation grows up unsure of what their country stands for. If America can no longer recognize who its friends are, how can it teach its children to recognize what is good? If it cannot distinguish between a persecutor and the persecuted, how can it be trusted to uphold justice? Israel, for all its flaws as any nation has, remains the only true democracy in the Middle East. It protects religious freedom, upholds the rule of law, and contributes to global innovation and security. Yet, the moment it defends itself, the world, and now even its closest ally, questions its actions. The narrative has been turned upside down. The aggressor is treated as the victim, and the victim is accused of aggression. That is what happens when truth is no longer the standard. That is what happens when a moral compass is ignored. America once prided itself on standing with the oppressed, championing freedom, and confronting tyranny. It once spoke boldly in defense of those surrounded by enemies and lifted high the torch of liberty. But now, it seeks neutrality where there can be no neutrality. It attempts balance where there should be conviction. It calls for restraint from those who are under attack, while saying little to those who initiate the violence. This is not diplomacy, it is moral confusion dressed as wisdom. When morality becomes relative, policy becomes unpredictable. What was once deemed unacceptable can now be justified as long as it fits a narrative or serves a temporary purpose. But a nation that operates this way will not stand for long. For without a compass, a ship may travel far, but it will never reach its destination. And if America continues to trade its moral clarity for political convenience, the consequences will not only be felt abroad, they will come home. Because the path a nation takes abroad reflects the path it has already taken in its own heart. Iran and Israel are not merely two nations at odds. They are symbols, powerful, prophetic, and deeply spiritual symbols in the unfolding narrative of human history. What we see in America's shifting allegiance toward Iran and growing distance from Israel is not just the reshuffling of diplomatic ties. It is a sign of a deeper spiritual blindness, a failure to discern the meaning behind these nations and what they represent in the greater design of God's purposes. To stand with one is to align with a spirit. To turn from the other is to step away from covenant. Iran, throughout history, has been a land associated with empires that rose against the purposes of God. In ancient times, it was Persia, once used by God through Cyrus to release the Jews from captivity, yet later, it became part of the pattern of powers that sought to dominate and control, often standing in opposition to God's chosen people. Today, modern Iran is ruled by a regime that openly opposes not just the nation of Israel, but the very spiritual foundations that Israel represents. Its leaders preach destruction. Its institutions spread hatred. Its networks support terror. And yet, this same nation is being approached with open hands as if decades of bloodshed and oppression can be overlooked in the name of strategic interest. Israel, on the other hand, is not simply another country on the map. It is a living prophecy, a nation reborn in a day after centuries of exile, just as foretold. A people gathered from the ends of the earth, speaking the ancient language again, planting vineyards on the mountains of Samaria, and praying at the Western Wall. Its very existence testifies to the reality of God's word and the fulfillment of his promises. To side with Israel is not just political alignment. It is a recognition of the hand of God moving through time. That is what makes this moment so critical. When America begins to drift toward Iran and away from Israel, It is not simply engaging in foreign policy. It is choosing which spirit it will follow. Will it embrace the spirit of covenant or the spirit of defiance? Will it honor what God has established? Or will it attempt to rewrite the order of things for the sake of temporary peace? Iran's leadership has never hidden its intentions. They speak not just of destroying Israel, but of ushering in a world order rooted in their version of divine rule, a vision that includes dominance over the West and the downfall of what they call the Great Satan. These are not idle threats. They are spiritual declarations. And yet, America now chooses to sit at their table, speak their language, and grant them legitimacy on the world stage. This is not wisdom, it is delusion. In contrast, Israel does not seek domination but survival. It does not chant for destruction but for peace. And it holds within it the memory of promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, promises that still stand. To forsake Israel is to forsake those promises, whether knowingly or unknowingly. It is to reject what God has kept and instead embrace what seeks to undo his work. This is a battle far greater than policy. It is a battle of symbols, a clash of spirits, a contest between covenant and rebellion. And America, by shifting its stance, is revealing where its heart lies. It is aligning with something that stands in direct opposition to the God of Scripture. And history has shown again and again, nations that walk this path do not go unshaken. History is not silent when it comes to the treatment of Israel. It speaks in warnings and patterns in the rise and fall of empires. Every kingdom, every power that has set itself against Israel has eventually fallen into ruin. This is not mere coincidence or the natural swing of political fortune. It is the outworking of a divine principle. The Word of God declares with striking clarity, "I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you." These are not symbolic words. They are not poetic niceties. They are spiritual laws embedded into the fabric of human history. To bless Israel is to align with God's purposes. To curse or forsake Israel is to provoke judgment. America once knew this. There was a time when its leaders spoke openly of standing with Israel, not just because it was wise, but because it was right. That alignment brought blessing, economic prosperity, global influence, military strength, and a mantle of leadership among the nations. But now, as America begins to step away from Israel and edge closer to Iran, it enters a dangerous zone, one marked not by diplomacy, but by the beginning of decline. The shift may not seem dramatic to the world. It may not be called betrayal in the headlines, but spiritually, it is significant. To turn away from the nation God has chosen, to even passively tolerate those who seek its destruction, is to put oneself in direct opposition to the purposes of God. History confirms this. Egypt once enslaved the children of Israel and stood as the most powerful empire on earth, until it defied God's call to let them go. Plagues fell, its economy collapsed, its army drowned in the sea, and its glory never returned. Babylon rose in splendor, only to fall under the weight of its arrogance and its treatment of Jerusalem. Rome crushed Judea and destroyed the temple, but centuries later, the empire crumbled from within. Spain expelled the Jews in 1492 and entered a rapid decline from global dominance. Nazi Germany turned its machinery of death against the Jewish people and was brought to ruin in a war that scarred its land and stained its legacy forever. The pattern is not random, it is prophetic. Now America, a nation that once called itself a friend of Israel, begins to entertain partnership with Iran, a regime that funds terror and spreads hatred against the Jewish state. This is not simply a poor strategic choice. It is a spiritual misstep, one that invites consequences far beyond the realm of politics. It signals to heaven that America is willing to compromise its stand, to trade moral clarity for temporary alliances, to choose convenience over covenant. And when that happens, the covering that once protected the nation begins to lift. No nation is exempt from the laws of God, not even America. Its greatness was never inherent, it was granted. Its blessings were never earned, they were given. And they can be withdrawn. The moment a nation blesses what is cursed and curses what is blessed, it sets itself on a course of instability. The economy may still function for a time. The military may still appear strong. But underneath, the foundations begin to crack. Israel is not perfect, but its existence is a testimony to God's faithfulness, and its protection is tied to his promises. To stand with Israel is to stand with the unfolding of divine history. To oppose it or even neglect it is to invite the same fate that has fallen on every empire that thought itself above divine judgment. And the clock does not stop ticking. The warnings are written, and the record of history waits to repeat itself, unless a nation chooses to remember, to return, and to bless what God has blessed. America's changing stance toward Israel and increasing openness toward Iran reveals something more troubling than a diplomatic shift. It exposes a deep identity crisis. The nation that once proudly declared, "In God we trust," now seems uncertain of who it is, what it stands for, and where it is headed. Foreign policy is often a reflection of a nation's internal condition. When a people no longer know their foundation, their vision becomes blurred, and their decisions become driven by fear, pressure, and the need to appease rather than lead. For decades, America stood as a moral compass in the world, not because it was perfect, but because it aspired to principles rooted in a higher standard. The founders acknowledged divine providence. Presidents spoke of America as a shining city on a hill, a beacon of freedom grounded in faith. The support for Israel flowed from that same spiritual root, from the understanding that Israel's restoration was not a political accident, but a divine act foretold by Scripture. To stand with Israel was to affirm that God's hand was still at work in history, and to recognize that there are promises which must be honored regardless of the cost. But something has changed. The words remain on the currency, but they no longer seem to carry weight in the heart of the nation. Instead of standing firm, America now wavers. It attempts to balance between two opposing forces. On one side, Israel, the covenant nation; on the other, Iran, a regime steeped in hostility toward the West and bent on the destruction of Israel. That America would even hesitate in its choice reveals how far it has strayed from its identity. A nation that once stood with conviction now speaks in compromise. Its leaders avoid calling out evil clearly for fear of political backlash. It negotiates with regimes that would never tolerate the very freedoms America claims to protect. It questions the actions of its allies while tolerating the provocations of its enemies. These are not the signs of confidence. These are the signs of a nation that has forgotten who it is. The shift also reflects a growing discomfort with the spiritual roots that once defined America. To support Israel is, in many ways, to acknowledge the biblical narrative, to admit that there is a God who acts in history, who chooses nations, who makes covenants, and who holds people accountable. But a nation that no longer wants accountability will eventually turn from the things that reminded of that truth. And so, in turning from Israel, America may think it is adjusting policy, but in reality, it is distancing itself from its spiritual mirror. Iran, by contrast, knows exactly who it is and what it believes. Its leaders speak with religious certainty, even if rooted in distortion. They do not hide their intentions. They see America as weak, divided, and spiritually hollow. They perceive not strength, but confusion. And confusion is easily exploited. This is the danger of a nation in identity crisis. It becomes vulnerable not only to external threats, but to internal decay. When a nation forgets who it is, it becomes a chameleon, changing with every political wind, seeking approval from the world rather than alignment with truth. America was never meant to walk in confusion. It was never intended to bow to fear or trade its moral clarity for strategic gains. But now, in the eyes of the world, it hesitates unsure of whether to stand with its historic ally or embrace the favor of those who mock its values. This moment is a mirror. It reflects not just America's foreign policy, but its spiritual condition. And until the nation reclaims its identity, until it remembers the God in whom it once trusted, it will continue to stumble, not just in the realm of politics, but in the very soul of its existence. Prophecy is not an ancient relic, buried in forgotten scrolls or whispered in distant times. It is alive, unfolding before our eyes. The events of today are not random. They are the echo of words spoken long ago, written not by men alone, but by the breath of the Almighty. And among those prophecies, none is more central to the destiny of nations than the role of Israel and the nations that align themselves either for or against her. What we are witnessing now in 2025, as America gradually shifts favor toward Iran and distances itself from Israel, is not just a strategic or political movement. It is a prophetic turning point. The Bible speaks clearly of a time when all nations will gather against Israel, when the world system, driven by pride and rebellion, will unite in opposition to the people and land God chose. This was foretold by the prophets, echoed by the apostles, and sealed by the words of Christ himself. It is not a matter of if, but when. And what we now see, this strange, almost surreal trend of America cozying up to the very regime that openly declares death to Israel and death to America, is not only irrational from a geopolitical perspective, it is a sign that the world is shifting into alignment with the final chapters of history. For decades, America was the exception. While many nations opposed or ignored Israel, America stood by her, a buffer against the tide of global hostility. This allegiance was not without flaws or inconsistency, but it was clear enough to matter. Yet now, that barrier is crumbling. America is being drawn into the orbit of nations that despise Israel, seduced by the illusions of diplomacy, economic interests, and political gain. And in doing so, it is being pulled closer to the great divide between those who will stand with God's purposes and those who will oppose them. Iran is not just a nation with anti-Israel sentiment. It is a prophetic player. The scriptures speak of Persia, as Iran was once called, rising in the last days in alliance with other nations against Israel. Ezekiel 38 names her among the coalition that will come against the land of unwalled villages. When America begins to favor Iran, it is not merely making a bad decision, it is being drawn, even if unknowingly, into the very alliances the prophets warned would precede the great shaking of nations. And what does prophecy say of those who abandon Israel in her time of need? It speaks of judgment, not always immediate, but certain. Joel declares that God will gather all nations in the valley of Jehoshaphat to judge them on one basis, how they treated his people and divided his land. The measure of a nation's destiny will be its posture toward Israel. And when America begins to falter in that stand, when it forgets the sacred weight of that relationship, it steps into the path of prophecy, not as a protector, but as a participant in the gathering storm. This moment is not about one administration or another. It transcends politics. It transcends party lines. It is spiritual. It is prophetic. And it carries with it eternal consequences. The shift toward Iran and away from Israel is not just a betrayal of an ally. It is a sign of the times, a sign that the world is moving closer to that day when every nation will be called to account, when the sheep will be separated from the goats, when allegiance will no longer be hidden behind policies, but exposed for what it truly is, either for the covenant or against it. The window is not yet closed, but it is narrowing. America still has a choice. But prophecy will unfold. The question is not whether it will happen. The question is what role America will play when it does.